One question I have that I think is on the minds of a lot of people is, in a typical work setting, you're going to have teams formed for a whole bunch of different reasons. Are there certain roles that you see the different generations tending towards? And then depending on the purpose of the team, I guess, would you say that any one generation is more suited for a leadership role on those teams?
What I found is that, of course, depending upon what you want out of the team dynamic, there are some roles that might be better suited today. It's going to change over time. Today, if you want strong leadership, you want someone who's self-confident, and you want somebody who has a sense of direction because they've had this experience before, then I would definitely look to a radio baby. If you want someone who is adept and comfortable with building consensus, seeking collaboration, and doesn't have to be the boss of everyone, then a baby boomer would be strong in that arena. If you want somebody who is going to take charge because he or she is definitive, concrete, and wants action, then a Gen Xer is going to be a good candidate for that. The Millennials and the Gen Zers have just enough experience so that they're not tired of the topic and are going to have some energy. So if you want energy and drive, then certainly the younger Gen Xers and the Millennials and particularly the older Gen Zers are going to be the best.
Yeah, so I think for those on the phone and those who might be listening to this much later on after it's recorded, if you're in charge of putting together a team, for you to think through what type of leader do you want, because you might be sitting around the table and then someone volunteers to lead, and it's not going to be the right leader for that situation. I think the younger generations, they've got a lot of ways to challenge status quo, and that might be perfect for something. But you don't want that person leading something where you really need to have this whole huge big picture understanding and lots of years of experience behind it. So I think if you're in charge of putting the team together, you're going to want to make sure you think through what are you trying to accomplish and which generation could lead this well.
I couldn't agree more. What's the objective of the team, and what kind of dynamic do you want around the table?
Great. Okay, and so we do have some questions coming in from the audience, and if you haven't submitted a question and have one, go ahead and do that now. No need to wait any longer. So the first question is, do you see the Gen Y and Gen Z groups evolving or growing as they gain more experience? And the handling conflict point seems interesting, and it may change as they gain experience.
Great question. I do see the generations evolving, just like the radio babies and the boomers and the Xers before them had to evolve. When I was in my early 20s as a baby boomer, I remember hearing several times from the radio baby generation, this younger generation is a bunch of hippies. They don't have any sense of order, and they're just going to take us to hell in a handbasket. I heard that phrase many times. So I'm observing in my work and in the focus groups that I'm doing and the interviews that I'm doing that the older Gen Yers are certainly getting some experience under their belt, learning how to handle disagreements in a more professional way, and the Gen Zers, I have every confidence, will be able to do the same.
Great. Okay, thank you. So have you been able to observe if the generational differences you talked about today apply globally, or is it culturally based, like you're talking about in the United States? It's like this.
Most of my research has been in the United States and Canada, although I have been doing some research in the East as well, Far East as well, and I have found that the time frames might be different, yet there are still some of the same challenges. For instance, many of the people that we would say are Gen Yers and Millennials in Japan, in the Philippines, in parts of China, are looking for change, are looking for more casual ways of making decisions in the business place, and the people that we would call the silent generation or radio babies are resisting that and saying we need to follow tradition and we need to be more formal. So yes, there are definitely generational differences across cultures.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so this next question is a little bit long. So the grouping by generation applies to communicating definitely across the age groups. but when it comes to motivation at work, does Dr. Chris Argyris' theory of adult personality and Maslow's hierarchy of needs still apply to motivating people?
There are some differences across the age groups when it comes to motivation. For instance, let's talk about recognition, which the researchers you mentioned will say, you know what, when you're trying to foster an environment of motivation, you have to recognize people. And I believe that is true, yet the recognition is going to be different for a boomer than for Gen Zer. A Gen Zer wants something that is instant gratification. Give me the cash. Gen Yer might say, it's okay if you want to wire some money to my bank account. And the radio baby, older baby boomer is going to say, give me a trophy and give it to me in front of the team.
Right. Give me a trophy in front of the team. I love it. Okay. So another question says, I've felt a sense from Gen X that many companies have bent over backwards to accommodate millennials as they started rising. Do you see that just as a natural order, meaning the older generation always says, oh, everybody's just, trying to appease you, and, or is there something more to that?
I think that appeasement notion is part of the factor. And with regard to Gen X, this is the one generation, I think, for many reasons. One of them because it is a condensed generation due to technological changes, that there aren't as many people in Gen X. I think this is a generation that has sometimes been neglected, in that the Gen Y started coming along, and then Gen Z came along, and there were so many of the baby boomers that Gen X has been neglected in terms of what they can contribute, what they would like out of the workplace, and what they need in order to stay with the organization. So in terms of recognition and fostering an environment, learning agility and coaching and mentoring, I think we need to do more for Gen Xers so that they will stay.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to something that I think is great. So the question is, you should write a book on these topics. And I fully support that, and maybe this person missed the intro, so I'll let you comment on that. But for those of you who have joined us in the past, you might know that our speakers can be anywhere in the world, but Dr. Gravett is here in Cincinnati, so we're sitting together in the same room, and it's just such a pleasure having someone like you here, and to gain the wisdom that you have created through your research over so many years, and really see the value in how it transcends everything we're doing at Xavier Health, which is why we had you give a session like this at PharmaLink.
Right.
But why don't you comment on, should you write a book about these?
Well, as a matter of fact, in 2007, I researched and then co-authored a book using my research with somebody who is a Gen Xer. Her name is Robin Throckmorton, and I kept doing research. After that book was published by Career Press in 2007, by focus groups, one-on-one interviews by phone and in person, the generations, the four generations, the older generations, and then I've been doing research in the past couple of years with Gen Zers to do the second edition of Bridging the Generation Gap. And as a matter of fact, I've been fortunate enough to have 6 books published in total on leadership, on business management ethics, on learning agility, emotional intelligence. In every book, there is a discussion, at least a couple of chapters, about the generations and how those topics relate to the generations.
Great. Okay. Yeah, it's hard to get away from it.
You really can't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Do you recommend communicating with people by a variety of ways? Discussion directly, email, text, or maybe the question could also be knowing how these generations prefer to communicate. Should you just stick with that, or do you try to push them out of their comfort zone? Or as a leader, how do you manage that?
As a leader myself, with 50 employees, I try to push myself out of my comfort zone first. But I'm tweeting now every day, and I am trying to get a handle on Instagram and Snapchat, and I think it's good for younger people to learn how to use other mediums as well, to feel more comfortable eyeball to eyeball, sitting around the table. So I think as leaders, we should encourage across mediums, different kind of communication.
Right, that's great. And I'll try not to interject personal stuff, but so my oldest son is 15, and so huge into texts and things like that.
Sure.
So trying to get him more comfortable with communicating face-to-face, I would ask him a question and say, now think about it, and then when you're ready to respond, let me know. And so it would give him a chance to collect his thoughts, because as he's texting, it can take as long as he wants, right? So I'm trying to teach him how to communicate verbally, because it's not natural. They don't have to think on their feet like that sometimes.
Exactly.
So it's fascinating. I love psychology.
So do I.
I've done that instead of chemistry.